In part 3 of this lecture, we are going to learn about learning. What impacts learning? How do we learn? How do we practice? In the context of training and development, learning refers to a change in KSAOs, in behaviors, or some other measure of performance. The change is brought about by experience or through intense practice. The way we learn, the way we induce a change, affects how information is perceived and stored in memory. When trainees use rehearsal, they go over information again and again and again repetitively until it sticks. When they use the organizing strategy, they look for similarities and trends across training topics. Elaboration involves relating current training content to previously learned training content, to more familiar knowledge. But learning isn't enough. We also need trainees to apply what they learned to their jobs. We call this transfer of training. Learning usually happens during training, during the actual learning event, while transfer of training is something that happens post-training, after the learning event. There are two important goals when it comes to transfer of training. Generalization occurs when trainees apply information from the training environment to a work environment that is similar to, but not identical to, the training environment, which is the case for many people. Many people are trained in situations that are different from the situations they face on the job. Maintenance is related to that idea that if we don't use something, we lose it. Use it or lose it. Maintenance involves the continuous use of some knowledge or skill or behavior on the job. Learning and development experts know that there are a variety of different factors that impact learning. We're going to cover just a few of them in this lecture. The first one is trainee readiness. How prepared are they in terms of having the information they need about the program itself, as well as having the KSAOs they need to succeed in the program? One of the readiness characteristics that we might consider is goal orientation. The type of goals that trainees set can be divided into two categories. Those with a learning orientation create goals related to increasing their KSAOs, behaviors, competencies. They believe that training success is defined as showing improvement and making progress, and they view errors and mistakes as just another part of the learning process. They tend to direct more attention and effort to the task and to learning for the sake of learning. Those with a performance orientation, on the other hand, pay more attention to the performance, to how they look in comparison to other trainees. They avoid errors and mistakes to avoid the anxiety that comes along with them and to avoid appearing foolish in front of the trainer and other trainees. They tend to direct more of their energy and attention to performing well and less to actually learning. In the typical college classroom, you can find some students who are there because they want to learn, they want to absorb the information and prepare for a better career in the future. They tend to have a learning orientation. Then you have students who are more concerned with getting an A than they are with actually learning the material. Those individuals have what we call a performance orientation. In addition to goal orientation, we might also consider the level of intelligence and experience that trainees bring to training. Trainees who have less experience or who are lower in intelligence might benefit from longer, more structured training programs, whereas trainees with more experience and higher levels of intelligence tend to learn more when training is shorter and less structured. Expectancy theory suggests that motivation is impacted by people's perceptions of the situation. First, they need to believe that they can learn to perform some task, what we call expectancy. They expect to be able to do something. Like reinforcement theory, this theory suggests that people should value the outcome attached to the behavior in order for it to have any motivating power. We call this valence, the degree to which someone values an outcome. And third is instrumentality. They need to believe that their performance is instrumental to receiving the reward. In some situations, people can get the reward without actually having to do the behavior. In training situations, we need to make sure that the behavior is closely tied to the outcome. If trainees' perceptions are lacking in any one of these areas, their motivation may suffer. Trainers are tasked then with enhancing trainees' self-efficacy, choosing valued rewards, and linking performance with those rewards. You may be familiar with reinforcement theory, the notion that behavior is influenced by consequences. When behavior is followed by reinforcement, it's more likely to be repeated in the future. When followed by punishment, that same behavior is less likely to be repeated. There are two types of reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is adding a desirable outcome after a desirable behavior. For example, saying thank you or recognizing someone's extra effort during training. Negative reinforcement is also a good thing. Negative reinforcement is not punishment. It's removing an undesirable outcome following a desirable behavior. We can stop sending reminder emails once trainees register for a training program, or we can remove a probationary period once new hires complete a training program. In both situations, we are removing something that people don't like, the reminder emails, the probationary period. There are also two types of punishment, which lessen the likelihood that behavior is repeated. Positive punishment is adding an undesirable outcome following an undesirable behavior. Employees might be asked to repeat a training program if they don't perform very well, or they may receive a written warning for their conduct in training. Negative punishment is removing a desirable outcome following an undesirable behavior. Trainees might lose access to certain amenities, or they may lose their credentials. So what? What does all this mean for us? This theory suggests that trainers need to identify the reinforcers that learners find most attractive, and then link these rewards to learning outcomes. Organizations often have disciplinary policies already put in place. This theory also suggests that punishment can be useful in deterring some behaviors. It's important to hold poor performing employees accountable for their poor performance. Social learning theory suggests we learn by observing other people and emulating their behaviors. The process begins with attention. We pay attention to what someone else is doing. Then we encode the important aspects of that behavior in our memory so that we can recall it later. During an appropriate time, we then reproduce that behavior and wait for either positive or negative consequences, sometimes both. If other people respond well to our behavior, then we will be more likely to repeat that behavior in the future. If people don't respond very well, we make a mental note of it and may not replicate that behavior in that situation ever again. Learning is also influenced by self-efficacy, by a person's beliefs about whether they can do something and do it well. Goal-setting theories suggest that behavior is a result of our conscious goals and intentions, that we learn because we seek to learn, because that is our goal. Goals influence behavior in at least three ways. They direct energy and attention towards something very specific. They keep people energized and moving forward even when they face obstacles. And they motivate people to figure out how they are going to reach their goals, sometimes motivating them to try new strategies that they've never tried before. In the context of training and development, goal-setting theories suggest that trainers should help trainees develop smart yet challenging goals to facilitate learning. When goals are too easy, they just don't motivate as well as they do when the goals are challenging. To maximize learning, trainees need to practice what they're reading, listening to, and discussing. Practice opportunities should involve the same actions and be performed under the same conditions mentioned in the learning outcomes. One of our concerns is the fidelity of the training environment, the degree to which it mimics the work environment. The physical fidelity of training is how similar the features of the training task are to those of the work task. Airplane simulators, for example, have high physical fidelity for pilots. Psychological fidelity refers to the similarity of the KSAOs that are required by the training task and those required by the work task. Role plays tend to have high psychological fidelity for customer service representatives. Once we've assessed the fidelity of a training situation, we determine whether each outcome attempts to develop open, closed, or both types of skills, and whether transfer is near, far, or both. There are different types of practice that can be incorporated in a training program. Trainees tend to learn better when practice is spaced and distributed over time and sessions, with breaks in between. The rest periods help the brain strengthen learned associations and reduce fatigue. Massed practice, on the other hand, occurs in a single session without breaks, like cramming for an exam just hours before it starts. We may use whole practice or part practice to help trainees tackle a particular task. Whole practice involves all of the behaviors of a task being practiced simultaneously. It's usually best for tasks that are organized or relatively simple. Other tasks can be broken into parts, and each one practiced separately. This is called part practice. Once each part is mastered, they can be combined to create the finished product, the completed task. Part practice is usually best for complex tasks and those that are less organized. Regardless of the type of practice that trainees engage in, we should encourage overlearning, the process of continuously using new KSAOs even after mastering them. Annual certification programs like CPR may attempt to do this through their refresher courses by focusing on the most important information. Ideally, we want trainees to overlearn and practice so much that their new skills become automatic and like second nature. Michael Jordan of the Chicago Bulls attributed his success on the basketball court to automatization. He practiced so much that his muscle memory took over during games, and he didn't have to think that much about how to play. In order to decide what type of practice to incorporate in a training program, we have to look to the training context and refer back to the needs assessment process.